Sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the smallest acts of kindness. When loneliness has carved deep lines in your heart, finding someone to care for can heal wounds you didn't even know existed. Eirik was a widowed woodcutter living alone in the harsh Norse winter, and Thyra was a mysterious woman he found collapsed at his village gate. She had no memory of her past and no family to claim her. What started as simple compassion, bringing a stranger in from the cold, became something that would change both their lives forever. As Thyra's true identity slowly emerged, they discovered that some people are meant to find each other, even when the whole world seems set against them. But who was this mysterious woman? And why were dangerous enemies hunting for someone who had lost all memory of who she once was? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the fjord, like the breath of sleeping giants. And Eirik Thorson knew that winter's grip would not release Skarnheim for many moons yet. He stood in the doorway of his modest timber dwelling, watching frost crystals dance in the pale dawn light, each one catching the amber glow of his oil lamp. At 43 winters, Eirik had grown comfortable with solitude, though comfortable was perhaps too generous a word. He had learned to bear it, the way a man learns to bear an old wound that aches before storms, his calloused hands wrapped around a steaming horn of pine needle tea, the bitter warmth a small comfort against the bite of Frostmar's coldest month. The village of Skarnheim stretched below his hillside home like a collection of sleeping bears, smoke rising from stone chimneys in lazy spirals. 200 souls called this place home, nestled between the dark waters of Grimfjord and the towering peaks of the Ironspine Mountains. It was a good place for those who valued peace over glory, sustenance over riches. Eirik's weathered face bore the marks of a life spent outdoors, crow's feet from squinting against snow glare, a scar along his left cheek from a falling branch, skin bronzed by countless summers under the northern sun. His beard, more silver than brown now, was kept neat and close-trimmed in the manner of working men. He stood tall but not imposing, broad-shouldered from years of swinging his father's iron axe, strong in the quiet way of those who knew their own capabilities without need to prove them. 3 years had passed since Astrid's fever took her during the bitter winter of her 38th year. The healer woman, Gudrun, had done what she could with willow bark and sacred herbs, but some illnesses were beyond mortal intervention. Eirik had held his wife's hand as her breathing grew shallow, promising her that he would tend their small plot of land, keep their goats fat and healthy, and remember the sound of her laughter on spring mornings when the ice broke on the fjord. He had kept those promises, though the laughter part proved hardest of all. The wooden house felt larger now, despite being built for just 2 people. Astrid's loom sat silent in the corner, her half-finished tapestry still stretched across its frame, a scene of wildflowers that she would never complete. Her clay bowls remained on the kitchen shelf, and her herb garden, now tended by Eirik's inexpert hands, struggled on with stubborn determination. Some plants had died, but the hardiest survived. Perhaps understanding that they were her last gift to him, Eirik worked his trade with methodical dedication, rising before dawn to check his snares and tend his small herd of goats. His reputation in Skarnheim was built on reliability rather than brilliance. When Bjorn the blacksmith needed oak for tool handles, or when widow Ragnhild required birch logs for her winter fire, they knew Eirik would deliver exactly what he promised. Cut to proper measure and seasoned to perfection. He charged fair prices and accepted payment in silver, goods, or services with equal grace. The villagers respected him, but maintained a careful distance, not from dislike, but from the recognition that grief had made him a quieter man than he once was. Old Thorvald, the village law-speaker, sometimes invited Eirik to share ale and stories in his great hall, but Eirik more often declined with polite thanks. Young Olaf, the fisherman's son, occasionally asked Eirik to help mend nets or join hunting parties. But again, Eirik preferred the solitude of his own work. This was not bitterness. but rather the natural pulling inward of a man learning to carry his life alone. Eirik had discovered that solitude could be a form of faithfulness, a way of honoring Astrid's memory by not rushing to fill the space she had occupied. He spoke to her sometimes quietly when he tended her herb garden or sat by their hearth on long winter evenings, not from delusion, but from the simple comfort of maintaining old habits of the heart. The village itself reflected the character of its people, practical, enduring, quietly beautiful. Stone foundations supported timber walls, chinked with moss and clay. Roofs of turf and bark shed rain and snow with efficient simplicity. The main thoroughfare was packed earth lined with drainage channels that carried spring melt down to the fjord. At the village centre stood the assembly hall where Thorvald held court, and the community gathered for festivals and important decisions. Skarnheim's prosperity came from the fjord and the forest. The men worked nets and lines for cod and herring, while others like Eirik harvested timber for local use and trade with settlements farther south. The women tended gardens, livestock and looms, creating goods both practical and beautiful. Children learned their trades early, understanding that survival in the north required everyone to contribute according to their abilities. The village gate was a modest affair, 2 stone pillars supporting iron-banded oak doors that were closed only during the worst storms or when raiders were rumored in the area. Most days, the gate stood open as a gesture of welcome to travelers and traders. A small shrine to Odin the Wanderer sat beside the path, where visitors could leave offerings and ask protection for their journeys. On this particular morning, as Eirik finished his tea and prepared to check his snares in the high meadow, he noticed unusual activity near the village centre. Several women had gathered near Gudrun's healing house, their voices carrying across the still air in urgent whispers. Ragnhild's son, Eirik, was running toward the gate with the quick, purposeful stride of someone carrying important news. Eirik pulled on his thick woolen cloak, secured his axe at his belt, and made his way down the winding path toward the commotion. The frost-hardened ground crunched under his leather boots, each step releasing small puffs of crystalline breath into the morning air. As he drew closer, he could make out individual voices in the gathering crowd. Found her just before sunrise, young Eirik was explaining to Thorvald, his words tumbling over each other with excitement. Collapsed right at the gatepost, half frozen and wearing nothing but a thin cloak. No horse, no pack, no sign of how she got here. Breathing? Gudrun asked, already gathering her healer's supplies. Aye, but barely. Jorik and I carried her to his house, got her near the fire. She's unconscious still, but her skin's warming. Thorvald stroked his iron-grey beard, considering. Any mark of clan or family? Jewelry, weapons, anything to tell us who she might be? Nothing, Lawspeaker. Clean clothes, but simple ones. And her hands, Eirik paused, searching for words. They're soft. Not the hands of a farmer's daughter or a fisherman's wife. Eirik found himself drawn forward by curiosity and something deeper, a stirring of protective instinct that surprised him with its intensity. When had he last felt moved to involve himself in village affairs? He approached the edge of the gathering as Gudrun prepared to examine the mysterious woman. Strange time for a traveller to be abroad, observed Bjorn the smith, his massive frame making others seem small by comparison. The mountain passes have been closed for a month, and no ships have put in at our harbour since before the first snows. Perhaps she came from inland, suggested Ragnhild, though her tone carried doubt. The settlement at Raven's Hollow, or one of the farms in the upper valleys. Thorvald shook his head. I know every family within 3 days' walk of here. This woman belongs to none of them, or word would have reached us of her disappearance. As the crowd began to disperse, following Gudrun toward Jorik's house, Eirik lingered near the gate. Something about the morning felt different, charged with possibility in a way he hadn't experienced in years. The iron hinges of the gate bore fresh scuff marks, as if something heavy had been dragged across the threshold. In the packed earth, barely visible in the early light, he could make out the impression of small boot prints leading to where the woman had been found, but there were no other tracks. No horse hooves, no sledge runners, no footprints of companions. just the delicate impressions of a woman's feet, appearing as if she had materialized from the mist itself. Eirik knelt and examined the marks more closely, his woodsman's eye reading the story written in frost and earth. The stride was uneven, stumbling. The impressions were deep in some places and light in others, suggesting exhaustion and disorientation. But most curious of all, the tracks seemed to begin in the middle of the path, as if the woman had simply started walking from empty air. Standing slowly, Eirik felt the weight of some approaching change settling over him like a heavy cloak. For 3 years, his life had followed predictable patterns, each day much like the last. But as he looked toward Jorik's house, where smoke rose more thickly from the chimney and concerned voices drifted through the morning air, he sensed that this morning's discovery would mark the end of that comfortable predictability. He thought of Astrid, as he often did when faced with decisions. What would she have counseled? The answer came easily. She would have gone immediately to offer help, bringing food and soft words and the gentle strength that had made her beloved throughout Skarnheim. She would have seen a person in need rather than a mystery to be solved, a stranger to be welcomed rather than a problem to be managed. With that thought, Eirik turned toward his house to gather supplies. If a woman had appeared at their gate with nothing but the clothes on her back, she would need warmth, food, and time to recover her strength. Whatever mystery surrounded her arrival could wait until she was well enough to provide answers. As he climbed the hill toward home, Eirik failed to notice the figure watching from the tree line beyond the village, a tall man wrapped in dark furs, his face hidden beneath a deep hood. The stranger observed the activity around Jorik's house for several long minutes before melting back into the forest shadows like smoke dispersing in wind. The morning mist was beginning to lift from the fjord, revealing patches of dark water between the ice floes. Soon, the village would wake fully to another day of winter routines. But for Eirik Thorson, widowed woodcutter of Skarnheim, this day would prove to be the first of a new chapter in a life he had thought was already complete. Eirik's hands trembled slightly as he ladled warm broth into a wooden bowl. Though whether from the morning cold or something deeper, he could not say. He had prepared a simple meal of barley porridge sweetened with honey, dried fish, and herb tea, foods that would be gentle on a stomach weakened by exposure and hunger. A clean woolen blanket lay folded beside the food bundle, along with a pair of Astrid's leather boots that had never been worn. The walk to Jorik's house felt longer than usual. Each step weighted with an unfamiliar anticipation. Eirik found himself wondering about the stranger's face, her voice, the circumstances that had brought her to collapse at Skarnheim's gate like a gift from the winter winds. Such thoughts felt strange after years of measured solitude, like muscles stretching after a long period of disuse. Jorik met him at the door, his weathered face creased with concern and curiosity. "Eirik, good of you to come. Gudrun's been with her for near an hour now. The woman stirs, but hasn't fully awakened. How does she fare?" "No frostbite, praise the gods. Exhausted, hungry, but she'll recover with rest and warmth," Jorik's voice lowered. "But there's something else. Gudrun says her clothes are finer than they first appeared. The weave is too perfect for common wool, and there are traces of expensive dyes." "This is no peasant girl lost in the mountains?" Eirik nodded, unsurprised. The mystery had been apparent from young Eirik's description, but hearing it confirmed sent a ripple of unease through him. "May I see her?" Jorik stepped aside, gesturing toward the sleeping alcove where a heavy curtain provided privacy. "Gudrun's just finished her examination. The woman was asking for water when I left to answer your knock." Behind the curtain, Gudrun looked up from her patient with tired eyes that had seen too many winters and tended too many wounds. She was a small woman, bent with age but steady in her movements, her grey hair braided with beads of amber and silver. Her reputation for healing extended far beyond Skarnheim, and more than one desperate family had made the difficult journey to seek her wisdom. "She'll live," Gudrun said simply, rising from her crouch beside the sleeping firs. "But whoever she is, she's traveled far and faced great hardship to reach us." Her feet are cut from walking in thin shoes over rough ground, and she's lost weight recently. You can see it in her face." Eirik set down his bundle and approached the sleeping alcove slowly, as if sudden movements might startle a wild creature. What he saw there stopped his breath entirely. The woman was young, perhaps 25 winters, with hair the color of wheat fields touched by autumn sun. Even in sleep, her features held a nobility that spoke of good bloodlines. High cheekbones, a straight nose, lips that seemed made for both laughter and command. But it was her hands that confirmed Jorik's assessment. They were pale and smooth, with long fingers that had never known the calluses of rough labor. As Eirik watched, her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the deep grey-blue of storm clouds gathering over the fjord. For a moment, she seemed lost, her gaze moving around the unfamiliar surroundings with the careful alertness of someone assessing danger. Then her eyes found his, and something passed between them, a recognition that had nothing to do with previous meetings, and everything to do with the mysterious connections that sometimes spark between souls. "Where am I?" Her voice was soft but clear, with an accent that Eirik could not immediately place. Not the familiar sounds of their region, but something more refined, as if she had learned to speak in halls where words carried weight and consequence. "Skarnheim village," Eirik replied gently. "You're safe. We found you at our gate this morning." She struggled to sit up, wincing as movement awakened aches throughout her body. Gudrun moved quickly to support her, arranging furs and pillows with practiced efficiency. The woman began, then stopped, pressing her fingers to her temples. "My head feels strange, clouded. I remember walking cold, but before that..." She looked up with eyes that held a growing panic. "I can't remember before that. I don't know how I came to be walking or from where." Gudrun and Eirik exchanged glances. Memory loss after exposure was not uncommon, but something in the woman's expression suggested this was deeper than simple confusion from cold and exhaustion. "What is your name?" Gudrun asked kindly. The woman was quiet for a long moment, her brow furrowed with concentration. "Thyra," she said finally. "I think, yes, Thyra, but I can't remember a family name or..." Her voice broke slightly. "I can't remember a family at all." Eirik found himself kneeling beside the sleeping firs, without conscious decision, drawn by an instinct to comfort that surprised him with its intensity. "Peace," he said softly. "Memory often returns gradually after hardship. You're alive and safe. That's what matters now." Thyra's eyes met his again, and he saw gratitude mixed with something that might have been relief. "You found me?" "Young Eirik did, but we all helped bring you to warmth." Eirik gestured to the food he had brought. "Are you hungry?" "I've prepared some simple fare." As if summoned by his words, Thyra's stomach produced an audible rumble that brought the first hint of a smile to her pale lips. "I am, though I don't know when I last ate." Over the next hour, Eirik and Gudrun took turns helping Thyra sip broth and nibble small pieces of bread. She ate with careful restraint despite her obvious hunger, another sign of noble upbringing, as common folk would have devoured food after such deprivation. Her manners were unconsciously elegant, her speech patterns educated, despite her inability to recall specific details of her past. "What do you remember of your journey here?" Gudrun asked when Thyra's immediate needs had been met. Thyra's fingers worried the edge of her blanket as she considered. "Fragments. Cold, always cold. Stars overhead, though I don't recall sleeping outdoors. Walking, always walking, but with purpose, as if I was seeking something specific or fleeing from something urgent." She paused, her expression growing troubled. "Fire, I remember fire and smoke and voices shouting, but whether I was running from danger or toward help, I cannot say. Your cloak was this frost-covered thing when we found you," Jorik said, holding up the garment that had been drying near the fire. "Simple wool, but well made. No clan markings or decorations." Thyra reached for the cloak with hands that shook slightly. As her fingers touched the familiar fabric, her eyes closed and her breathing quickened. "This cloak, someone gave it to me. A man with kind eyes and rough hands. He said..." She stopped, pressing her palm to her forehead. "The memory slips away like water." Eirik felt something twist in his chest as he watched her struggle with the fragments of her lost past. There was something profoundly touching about her vulnerability, the way she faced her circumstances with courage despite obvious fear. She was clearly a woman of quality, perhaps even nobility. Yet here she sat, in a fisherman's hut, accepting charity from strangers without complaint or demands for special treatment. Rest, Gudrun counseled. Memory is like a wild animal. Chase it too hard, and it will flee deeper into the woods. Let your mind heal as your body does. But as Thyra settled back into the sleeping firs, a commotion arose outside Jorik's house. Voices were calling, and the sound of running feet echoed through the morning air. Eirik rose and pulled aside the door, hanging to investigate. Young Eirik was racing up the path from the gate, his face flushed with excitement and alarm. Behind him came Thorvald and several other men, their expressions grim. "Riders approaching," Eirik called as he reached the house. "Armed men, maybe a dozen, coming hard up the fjord path. They'll be at the gate within the hour." Eirik felt ice settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the morning cold. In his bones, he knew these riders were connected to the mysterious woman now lying vulnerable in Jorik's sleeping alcove. Whether they came as rescuers or pursuers, their arrival meant that Thyra's brief sanctuary was about to end, and the peaceful morning that had begun with a simple act of mercy was about to transform into something far more dangerous. He looked back toward the alcove where Thyra lay, her storm-grey eyes now wide with an fear that seemed to recognize a threat, even if her memory could not name it. The quiet life Eirik had built around his grief was about to be shattered, and he found himself facing a choice that would define not just his own future, but the fate of the mysterious woman who had appeared at their gate like an answered prayer or a dangerous curse. The sound of approaching hoofbeats grew steadily louder, like distant thunder rolling across the fjord. Eirik's mind raced through possibilities, each one more troubling than the last. Armed riders traveling in winter spoke of urgent business, the kind that often ended in bloodshed for those who stood in their way. "Thyra," he said quietly, returning to her side. "These riders, do they stir any memory?" Her face had gone pale as birch bark, and her hands clutched the woolen blanket with white-knuckled intensity. Perhaps something dark, frightening. Men with swords and cruel voices." She looked up at him with eyes that held both fear and determination. "I think I may have been running from such men." Thorvald appeared in the doorway, his law speaker's authority evident in his bearing despite the early hour. "Eirik, we need to speak, all of us." His gaze shifted to Thyra with careful assessment. "You as well, woman. These riders may concern you." Within minutes, a hasty council had assembled in Jorik's main room. Thorvald, Gudrun, Bjorn the Smith, and Ragnhild, representing the village women, along with young Eirik, who had first spotted the approaching party. Thyra sat wrapped in furs near the fire, her presence creating an undercurrent of tension that everyone could feel, but none could name. 12 riders, Eirik reported, his breath still coming hard from his run. "Well armed, wearing mail and helms. Their leader rides a black stallion and carries a banner I don't recognize, something with a red wolf's head." Thyra's sharp intake of breath drew every eye in the room. "The red wolf," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know that symbol, though I can't remember why it terrifies me so." Thorvald leaned forward, his expression grave. "If armed strangers seek something in our village, we must know what we're dealing with. The safety of 200 souls rests on the decisions we make in the next few minutes. They're still a quarter hour away," Bjorn observed. "We could hide the woman, claim no knowledge of her arrival, and if they search every house," Ragnhild countered, "we'd be branded as liars and face their wrath regardless." Eirik found himself speaking before he'd fully considered his words. "I'll take her to my house. It's furthest from the village center, and if these men mean harm, better they find only one target than endanger everyone." "No." Thyra's voice cut through the discussion with unexpected strength. Despite her weakness, she struggled to sit straighter, her chin raised in a gesture that spoke of noble blood. "I won't have innocent people suffer for my sake. If these men seek me, let them find me, but let me face them on my own terms. Gudrun shook her head firmly. Child, you can barely stand. Whatever these men want, you're in no condition to face them alone. The healer speaks truth, Eirik agreed. And Thorvald, consider this. If we meet these riders openly and honestly, we maintain the law's protection. Skarnheim has done nothing wrong in offering shelter to a traveler. If they have legitimate claim to the woman, let them state it before witnesses. Thorvald nodded slowly. Wisdom in that. We'll receive them at the gate as custom demands, but everyone remains alert. Bjorn, see that your apprentices have tools at hand. Hammers and tongs make adequate weapons if needed. Eirik, gather the younger men quietly. No obvious preparations for battle, but be ready, as the council dispersed, to make preparations. Eirik remained behind with Thyra. She was attempting to stand, testing her strength against the weakness that still plagued her body. Her determination was evident, but so was her vulnerability. Here, Eirik said, offering his arm for support. The boots I brought will fit you, and there's a heavier cloak if you're determined to face these riders. You're very kind, Thyra said softly as she accepted his help. I don't understand why you would risk yourself for a stranger. The question gave Eirik pause. Why had he so quickly offered protection to this woman? Was it simple decency or something deeper that he wasn't ready to examine? Every person deserves safety and shelter, he said finally. That's not kindness, it's duty. But as he helped Thyra don the warmer clothing, Eirik knew his answer wasn't entirely honest. There was something about this woman that called to him, awakening protective instincts that had lain dormant since Astrid's death. Perhaps it was her quiet courage, or the vulnerability beneath her noble bearing. Perhaps it was simply that helping her made him feel useful again, needed in a way that had been absent from his solitary life. The sound of hoofbeats had grown loud enough that individual horses could be distinguished. Through Jorik's small window, they could see villagers emerging from their houses, gathering in the main thoroughfare with the careful casualness of people trying not to appear alarmed. Children were kept close to their mothers, while the men positioned themselves with subtle readiness. They're at the gate, Eirik called from outside. Thyra's hand found Eirik's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Whatever happens, she said quietly, know that your kindness has meant more to me than I can express. In a world that seems full of darkness, you've shown me light. Before Eirik could respond, the sound of voices carried across the village. A man's voice, harsh and commanding, called out in a tone that brooked no argument. People of Skarnheim, we seek a woman fair-haired, young, traveling alone. She is wanted for theft and treason against her rightful lord. Any who harbor her will face the consequences of their misplaced mercy. The words fell over the village like a heavy stone, dropped into still water, sending ripples of unease through the gathered crowd. Eirik felt Thyra stiffen beside him, her breathing becoming shallow and quick. Lies, she whispered, though her voice held uncertainty. I think they're lies, but I can't remember enough to be certain. Thorvald's voice rose in response, carrying the authority of his position as law speaker. Strangers are welcome in Skarnheim if they come in peace and respect our laws. State your names and business that we may hear your petition properly. I am Ragnar Bloodeye, sworn man to Jarl Magnus the Red. The woman we seek is a runaway thrall who stole precious items when she fled her master's hall. She was seen on the mountain paths heading toward this settlement. At the word thrall, Thyra's entire body went rigid. Even without her memories, some deep part of her recoiled from the suggestion that she was anyone's property. No, she breathed. That's not... I would know if I were enslaved, but doubt crept into her voice even as she spoke the words. How could she be certain of anything when her past remained locked away? What if these men spoke truth? What if her flight to Skarnheim had indeed been an escape from lawful bondage? The uncertainty in her voice tore at Eirik's heart. To see someone struggle not just with physical weakness, but with the terrible possibility that their very existence might be a crime. It awakened a fierce protectiveness in him that surprised him with its intensity, whether you are thrall or free. Woman, he said quietly, you deserve better than to be dragged away by armed strangers without proper hearing. Let them state their case before the village. If their claim has merit, the law will sort it out. But even as he spoke the words, Eirik knew that law and justice were often different things when armed men faced defenseless women. The next few minutes would determine not just Thyra's fate, but the kind of man he himself would prove to be when faced with a choice between safety and righteousness. The confrontation at Skarnheim's gate played out like a scene from the old stories, armed strangers demanding justice, while villagers stood their ground on familiar soil. Eirik and Thyra made their way slowly toward the gathering, her hand resting on his arm for support as much as comfort. With each step, he could feel the tremor in her fingers, whether from weakness, fear, or both. Ragnar Bloodeye sat his black stallion with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to having his demands met. He was perhaps 35 winters old, with iron-grey eyes and a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, the kind of mark that spoke of many battles survived. His mail was well-maintained, his weapons of good quality, and the 11 men behind him carried themselves with the discipline of seasoned warriors. "Thorvald Lawspeaker," Ragnar began, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled villagers. "We have reason to believe the thrall woman arrived here within the past day. She is wanted for stealing a sacred arm ring of silver and amber from her master's hall before fleeing in the night. The theft is compounded by the murder of a guard who tried to prevent her escape." A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Murder elevated this from a simple matter of runaway property to a blood crime that demanded justice. Eirik felt Thyra's grip tighten on his arm, her face draining of what little color had returned to her cheeks. "That's not possible," she whispered, though her voice carried uncertainty. "I couldn't have killed anyone. I wouldn't," but the doubt in her eyes spoke louder than her words. How could she deny accusations about actions she couldn't remember? How could any of them defend someone whose very identity remained a mystery? Thorvald stepped forward, his bearing dignified despite facing superior numbers. "These are grave charges, Ragnar Bloodeye. If you speak truth, then justice must indeed be done. But I would see proof of your claims before any decision is made. What evidence do you carry that this alleged thrall passed through our lands?" Ragnar reached into his saddle pack and withdrew a piece of cloth, fine linen, dyed a distinctive blue-green. This was torn from her dress on a thorny branch near Raven's Pass. The color matches the garment she wore when she fled, and the weave marks it as property of Jarl Magnus. Eirik studied the fabric sample, his woodsman's eye noting details that others might miss. The tear was clean, too clean for having been caught on thorns. And the dye, while expensive, showed none of the fading that would be expected from outdoor exposure. But these observations meant little in the face of armed men, demanding what they claimed was lawful justice. "You may search our village," Thorvald said carefully. "If such a woman is found, we will hear all sides before rendering judgment according to ancient law." "Generous of you," Ragnar replied with a smile that held no warmth. "But unnecessary. My men tracked her footprints directly to your gate. She's here, and we know it. Produce her now, and we'll take only what belongs to our Jarl. Refuse, and we'll search every house until we find her, and take compensation for our trouble in the bargain." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Everyone present understood the implication. Ragnar and his men could indeed search the village, and in doing so might claim anything that caught their fancy as compensation for their efforts. Resistance would mean bloodshed, and Skarnheim's people were farmers and fishermen, not warriors, but as Ragnar's gaze swept the crowd, searching for signs of the woman he sought, Eirik made a decision that surprised even himself. He stepped forward, bringing Thyra with him into the open space before the mounted warriors. "Here stands the woman you seek," he called out, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "But I claim protection for her under the ancient laws of hospitality. She arrived at our gate near death from exposure. Until she has recovered her strength and can speak for herself, she remains under Skarnheim's protection." A murmur ran through the crowd, some approving, others fearful of the consequences. Ragnar's cold eyes fixed on Thyra with unmistakable recognition, and a predatory smile spread across his scarred features. "So there you are, little rabbit," he said softly. "Did you truly think you could hide forever among these simple folk?" Thyra straightened despite her weakness, and when she spoke, her voice carried a dignity that made several of Ragnar's men shift uncomfortably in their saddles. "I know not of what theft or murder you speak. My memories of the past are lost, but my conscience is clear. If you have proof of these crimes beyond mere accusation, present it properly. Proof." Ragnar laughed harshly. "Your presence here is proof enough. No innocent woman flees in winter without cause, especially one of your former station." The pause before former station was deliberate, calculated to wound. But instead of cowering, Thyra raised her chin higher, and for a moment Eirik glimpsed the woman she must have been before fear and memory loss had stripped away her certainty. "Then, let your proof be examined by those who understand law and justice," she replied. "If I am guilty, I will face the consequences. But I will not be dragged away on accusation alone." Old Gudrun stepped forward, her healer's wisdom commanding respect even from armed strangers. "The woman speaks fairly. She has suffered exposure and injury. By ancient custom, no one may be compelled to stand trial until they are restored to health and right mind." Ragnar's expression darkened. "You would shelter a murderess behind custom and law?" "I would see justice done properly," Gudrun replied firmly. "If she is guilty, the truth will emerge. If innocent, then it is we who would bear guilt for delivering her to false accusers." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Ragnar's men were clearly ready for violence, hands resting casually on sword hilts and spear shafts. The villagers stood their ground, but with the careful tension of people who knew they were outmatched in any direct confrontation. Then Eirik surprised everyone, including himself, by speaking again. "I propose a compromise. The woman will remain in Skarnheim under guard until her health and memory return. When she is fit to stand trial, representatives of Jarl Magnus may return to present their evidence formally. Until then, she enjoys our protection as a guest who arrived in need, and who would serve as this guard." Ragnar asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. "I will," Eirik replied without hesitation. "I claim responsibility for her safekeeping and will answer personally for any attempt at escape or further crimes." The words left his mouth before he fully considered their weight. By accepting guardianship, he was binding himself to Thyra's fate. If she proved guilty, his honor would be stained. If she fled, his life would be forfeit. Yet as he looked at the woman beside him, proud despite her vulnerability, brave despite her fear, he knew he could make no other choice. Thyra turned to look at him with wonder and something deeper in her storm-gray eyes. "You would stake your reputation, perhaps your life, for someone you barely know." "I would stake them for what I believe is right," Eirik replied quietly. "And I believe you are not what these men claim you to be." Ragnar studied this development with calculating eyes, clearly weighing his options. He could take Thyra by force, but doing so would mean slaughtering or scattering innocent villagers, an act that might bring consequences from the regional jarls who valued stability over individual grievances. Better to wait and see what developed, especially with a local man willing to stake his honor on the outcome. After a tense negotiation that stretched well into the afternoon, Ragnar Blood-Eye agreed to Eirik's proposal with conditions that made clear this was no victory for Skarnheim. The armed band would make camp in the forest beyond the village and return in 7 days to collect their quarry. During that time, Thyra would remain under Eirik's personal guard, forbidden from leaving the village boundaries. Any attempt at escape would void the agreement and bring swift retribution. 7 days, woodcutter, Ragnar had said before wheeling his black stallion away from the gate. Use them to prepare your farewells. When we return, the woman comes with us, willing or not. Now, as evening shadows stretched across the fjord, Eirik helped Thyra climb the winding path to his hillside home. Her strength had improved throughout the day, but the confrontation with Ragnar had taken its toll. She leaned heavily on his arm, her breathing labored by the time they reached his door. The timber house felt different with another presence inside its walls. For 3 years, Eirik had grown accustomed to the particular silence that comes with living alone, the absence of conversation, the echo of solitary footsteps, the way thoughts could unfold without interruption or observation. Now, as Thyra settled gratefully onto a bench near his hearth, the space seemed to expand and contract simultaneously, becoming both more crowded and less lonely. "I've placed you in an impossible situation," Thyra said, as Eirik kindled the fire to drive away the evening chill. "You barely know me, yet you've pledged your honor to my innocence. Why?" Eirik considered the question, while arranging birch logs in careful patterns that would burn long and steady. Why indeed? Was it merely the chivalrous impulse of a decent man, or something deeper that he wasn't ready to examine? "When I look at you," he said finally, "I see someone in need of protection. The rest is less important than that simple fact. But if I am what they claim, a thief and murderer, then your kindness will be rewarded with your own destruction. Then we must discover the truth of what you are." Eirik turned from the fire to face her, noting how the flickering light softened the lines of worry around her eyes. "Tell me what you do remember, however fragmentary. Sometimes the pieces of a broken pot can be fitted together if one is patient enough." Thyra closed her eyes and leaned back against the wooden wall, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Fire," she said softly. "Always fire when I try to remember. Not a hearth fire like this one, but something larger, more destructive. Voices shouting, people running, and cold, terrible cold that seemed to seep into my very bones. What of the man who gave you the cloak? You mentioned kind eyes and rough hands. Yes, but his face is unclear. Old, I think, with silver in his beard. He was urgent about something, pressing the cloak into my hands and speaking quickly. Something about—" She paused, pressing her fingers to her temples. "About finding the truth in Skarnheim. But why this village specifically, I cannot say." Eirik felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. If someone had deliberately sent Thyra to Skarnheim, then her arrival was not the random chance it had appeared. But who would send a fugitive to their small village, and why? "The sacred arm ring they claim you stole," he continued. "Does that stir any memory?" Thyra's hand moved unconsciously to her throat, as if reaching for jewelry that was no longer there. Silver and amber twisted together in ancient patterns. "I can almost see it, but whether from memory or imagination, I cannot tell. It was important, not just valuable, but meaningful in some way that went beyond mere wealth." As they talked, Eirik prepared a simple evening meal of bread, cheese, and preserved berries. He found himself noting small details about his unexpected guest, the careful way she moved despite her weakness, the unconscious grace with which she accepted his hospitality, the intelligence that shone in her eyes even when discussing her lost memories. These were not the mannerisms of a thrall, whatever Ragnar Bloodeye might claim. "You were educated," Eirik observed as they shared the meal. "Your speech patterns, your bearing, someone invested considerable effort in your upbringing, perhaps. But education alone doesn't prove innocence. Noble-born criminals are not unknown in this world. True, but they are rare. Most crimes stem from desperation or base nature." "You show neither trait," Thyra smiled sadly. "You see in me what you wish to see, I think. A woman in need rather than a danger. But what if your kindness blinds you to harsh truths?" Before Eirik could respond, a soft knock came at his door. He opened it to find young Eirik standing in the gathering darkness, his expression troubled. "Eirik, forgive the intrusion, but Thorvald asked that you come to his hall. There's been developments." "What manner of developments?" Eirik glanced toward Thyra, then back to Eirik with obvious reluctance. "A messenger arrived an hour past. From Jarl Magnus himself. He confirms the charges against the woman and demands her immediate return. And there's more. He offers a reward of 10 silver marks for her capture, but threatens the destruction of any settlement that harbors her." The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of consequence in all directions. 10 silver marks was a fortune to a village like Skarnheim, enough to see them through several harsh winters. But the threat carried equal weight. Jarl Magnus commanded considerable military strength, and his displeasure could indeed mean the end of their peaceful existence. "I must go," Eirik said quietly. "Will you be—" "I'll be fine," Thyra interrupted, though her voice carried strain. "Go and hear what must be heard. I understand that protecting me grows more costly by the hour." As Eirik made his way down the darkened path toward Thorvald's hall, his mind wrestled with impossible choices. The evidence against Thyra was mounting, the pressure on the village increasing, and his own position becoming more precarious with each passing hour. Yet something deep in his bones insisted that appearances deceived, that the woman now sitting alone in his house was not the criminal Ragnar Bloodeye proclaimed her to be. The great hall buzzed with tense conversation as the village's most prominent citizens debated their options. Some argued for immediate surrender of the fugitive to protect the greater good. Others insisted that honor demanded they stand by their commitment to shelter her, or looked to Eirik as he entered, recognizing that his decision to accept guardianship had placed him at the center of their dilemma. "The Jarl's message is clear," Thorvald said without preamble. "Return the woman or face the consequences. And Eirik, there's something else." The messenger brought this. He held up a silver arm ring inlaid with amber pieces, beautiful, ancient, and unmistakably valuable. "He claims this is twin to the one that was stolen. If the woman still possesses its mate, her guilt would be proven beyond question." Shriek accepted the arm ring with hands that trembled slightly. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the silver worked in patterns that spoke of master artisans and considerable age. If Thyra possessed such a treasure, it would indeed be difficult to explain through innocent means. But as he turned the arm ring in the firelight, studying its intricate details, Eirik noticed something that sent his pulse racing. Worked into the amber pieces, almost too small to see without close examination, were tiny runes that spelled out a single word: Freydis. It was a name clearly, but whose? And why did its discovery fill him with both hope and dread in equal measure? The name Freydis, carved in runes on the arm ring, burned in Eirik's mind as he walked slowly back up the hillside path. The village council had debated long into the night, voices growing more heated as the reality of their situation became clear. Some demanded immediate surrender of Thyra to save their homes and families. Others argued that honor forbade abandoning someone under their protection without proof of guilt. In the end, they had reached an uneasy compromise. One more day to search for evidence of Thyra's true identity before making a final decision. But Eirik carried more than village concerns as he approached his house. The runes had stirred something in his memory, fragments of old stories told on winter nights when the wind howled around the hearth. Freydis was not a common name, and its appearance on such an ancient arm ring suggested connections to old bloodlines and older secrets. He found Thyra standing at his small window, gazing out at the star-scattered sky above the fjord. The firelight caught the gold in her hair and cast gentle shadows across her profile, reminding him how beautiful she was beneath the marks of hardship and fear. She turned as he entered, and he saw that she had been weeping, not the dramatic tears of hysteria, but the quiet sorrow of someone facing an inevitable and unpleasant truth. "The village council has decided my fate," she said quietly. "It was not a question. They've decided to wait one more day before making any final judgment. There's still time to discover the truth of who you are." Thyra's smile held little hope. "And if the truth proves worse than the accusations? If I am indeed this murderous thrall they seek?" Eirik moved to the hearth and added fresh wood to the dying fire, using the simple task to order his thoughts. "I've brought something that may help restore your memory," he said finally, reaching into his cloak to withdraw the silver arm ring. "Tell me if this seems familiar." The moment Thyra's eyes fell on the armband, her entire body went rigid. The color drained from her face, and she took an involuntary step backward, as if the silver itself posed physical danger. "Where did you get that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling flames. "The Jarl's messenger brought it, claiming it to be twin to the one you supposedly stole. But look closer. There are runes worked into the amber." Can you read them? Thyra approached the arm ring with obvious reluctance, her hands trembling as she accepted it from Eirik's outstretched palm. As her fingers traced the runic inscription, her breathing grew shallow and quick. Freydis, she read aloud, and the words seemed to unlock something deep in her mind. Her eyes widened, and she staggered as memories came flooding back like a dam breaking under spring floods. "My sister's name," she gasped, pressing her free hand to her forehead as images cascaded through her consciousness. "Freydis is my younger sister. We were—" She stopped, her face twisting with sudden pain. "Oh gods, I remember now. I remember everything." Eirik guided her to a bench before she could collapse, his hands steady on her shoulders as she struggled to process the returning flood of memory. "Take your time. Let the memories settle before you try to speak of them." For several long minutes, Thyra sat in silence, her eyes closed as she sorted through the recovered fragments of her past. When she finally looked up at Eirik, her expression held a complexity of emotions: relief, sorrow, fear, and something that might have been desperate hope. "My name is Thyra Eiriksdottir," she said slowly, as if testing each word for truth. Was daughter to Jarl Eirik the Bold of Raven's Hollow and sister to Freydis. We are not thralls, nor ever were. We are Jarl-born, with bloodlines reaching back to the Sea Kings of old. Then the accusations against you. Our lies built on a foundation of terrible truth." Thyra's voice grew stronger as the memories solidified, but her eyes remained haunted. 3 weeks passed. My father's hall was attacked in the night. Our men, perhaps 20 or more, broke down our doors and put everything to the torch. They killed— Her voice broke briefly. "They killed my father, my brothers, most of our household guards. My sister and I escaped only because we were in the women's quarters when the attack began." Shriek felt ice settle in his stomach. Who would dare attack a Jarl's hall? "Jarl Magnus the Red," Thyra said, her voice now hard with remembered fury. "He had sought alliance through marriage, demanding that I wed his eldest son, a brute named Thorvald, who was known for his cruelty to women and thralls alike. When my father refused the match, Magnus threatened war. We thought it mere bluster, a way to pressure us into reconsidering. We were wrong, but if Magnus destroyed your family, why would he then claim you as a runaway thrall?" Thyra held up the silver arm ring, its amber pieces glowing in the firelight. "Because of these. They are not merely valuable, they are proof of legitimacy. My great-grandmother was Astrid the Wise, daughter of a sea king whose bloodline carries the right to challenge the authority of lesser jarls. These arm rings were her wedding gift, passed down through the women of our family. Whoever possesses them can claim leadership of the old coastal alliances." Understanding dawned on Eirik like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Magnus doesn't just want you dead, he wants you discredited. If you're branded as a common thief and murderer, your bloodline's claims die with your reputation. Exactly. And Freydis, Thyra's voice caught on her sister's name. She was captured during our escape. Magnus holds her, probably as insurance against my cooperation. If I surrender myself to clear her name, we both die quietly. If I try to expose his crimes, he kills her and claims I murdered my own sister in madness. But you escaped with one of the arm rings. My old tutor, a man named Gunnar Ironbeard, helped us flee the burning hall. He pressed my grandmother's cloak and this ring into my hands, telling me to seek help in Skarnheim. He said there were those here who remembered the old alliances, who might aid the rightful heir if she could prove her identity. Thyra's eyes met Eirik's with sudden intensity. But the cold and shock and terror, they stole my memories until now. I've been stumbling blind through events that could reshape the entire region. Eirik stared at the woman before him, trying to reconcile the humble refugee he had rescued with the noble-born heir she claimed to be. Yet even as he struggled with the revelation, everything about Thyra made new sense: her unconscious dignity, her educated speech, her instinctive assumption of authority, even in weakness. "If what you say is true," he said carefully, "then you're not just an innocent woman falsely accused. You're the rightful challenger to Magnus's growing power. Yes, and tomorrow when Ragnar Bloodeye returns, he'll either take me back to a public execution designed to legitimize Magnus's claims, or I'll have to find some other way to rescue my sister and expose the truth. Thyra's fingers tightened around the arm ring until her knuckles went white. Either way, I've brought terrible danger to your peaceful village, and I cannot forgive myself for that. But as Eirik looked at this woman, this Jarl's daughter, who had lost everything yet maintained her dignity and courage, he realized that her presence had awakened something in him that had been dormant since Astrid's death. Not just protectiveness, but purpose. For 3 years he had existed in comfortable isolation, but now he faced the possibility of standing for something greater than his own quiet survival. Dawn brought an unexpected visitor to Eirik's door. Not Ragnar Bloodeye as expected, but a figure from Thyra's recovered past that would change everything they thought they knew about their situation. The knock came soft and urgent, more plea than demand, and when Eirik opened the door, he found an old man leaning heavily on a walking staff, his beard silver-white and his eyes bright with intelligence despite obvious exhaustion. "Gunnar Ironbeard," Thyra breathed from behind Eirik, her voice mixing joy with disbelief. "You survived the attack." The old tutor's weathered face creased with relief as he saw his former student alive and well. "My lady, praise the gods you received my message. I feared the worst when you didn't arrive at the meeting point." "Meeting point?" Eirik asked, confusion evident in his voice. Gunnar's keen eyes assessed Eirik carefully before he answered. "Young master, I sent Thyra to Skarnheim for reasons beyond mere sanctuary. This village holds secrets that could turn the tide of war if we can unlock them in time," as they brought the old scholar inside and settled him near the fire with warm food and drink. Gunnar revealed truths that reframed everything they thought they understood about Thyra's arrival and the forces arrayed against them. "Jarl Magnus did indeed attack Ravenshollow," Gunnar confirmed, his voice heavy with the weight of witnessed horrors. "But his assault was not random violence or simple territorial ambition. He seeks something specific, something that was hidden here in Skarnheim generations ago when the old alliances still held power." "What could possibly be hidden in our village?" Eirik asked. "We're fishermen and farmers, not keepers of ancient treasures." Gunnar's smile held secrets accumulated over decades of study. "Your village sits on ground that was once sacred to the old Sea Kings. Before the coming of the Christ followers, before the Jarls carved up the coastlands into petty kingdoms, this was a place of great gathering. The rune stone that stands in your village center, have you ever wondered why it bears no inscriptions? Despite its obvious age, Eirik had indeed noticed the oddity of the blank stone pillar that dominated Skarnheim's main square. Unlike most rune stones, which proclaimed the deeds of the dead or marked important boundaries, theirs carried no visible markings despite clearly being ancient work. "The inscriptions are there," Thyra said slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "But hidden. My great-grandmother's stories spoke of secret knowledge carved in runes that could only be seen under specific conditions." "Precisely, my lady, and more than hidden knowledge, hidden treasure. When the old alliances fell and the Sea King's power waned, their accumulated wealth was dispersed and concealed throughout the coastal lands. One of the greatest hoards was buried here, beneath the runestone, with instructions for its recovery hidden in the stone itself." Gunnar reached into his traveling pack and withdrew a small bronze mirror, its surface polished to mirror brightness despite obvious age. "This is the key, a scrying glass that belonged to your ancestor Astrid the Wise. When placed at the proper angle to catch dawnlight reflected from the fjord, it reveals the hidden runes on the stone." The implications struck Eirik like a physical blow. "You're saying that beneath our village square lies treasure significant enough to finance a war?" "Not just any war," Gunnar replied grimly. "Magnus knows of the Horde's existence through captured documents from Ravenshollow. With that wealth, he could hire mercenary armies large enough to conquer the entire coastal region. He would transform himself from a petty jarl into a true king, ruling through force rather than the consent of allied clans. But why attack Thyra's family first? Why not simply come for the treasure directly? Because the hoard is protected by more than mere burial. Ancient oaths bind it. It can only be claimed by one carrying the blood of the Sea Kings and bearing the proof of legitimate inheritance. Gunnar gestured toward the silver arm ring that Thyra still wore. Magnus needed to eliminate the rightful heirs and claim their tokens of authority. With Thyra dead and her arm ring in his possession, he could present himself as the lawful inheritor of the old king's wealth. Thyra's face had gone pale as the magnitude of the situation became clear. "And Freydis lives as far as I know, but only as long as you remain free to potentially expose Magnus's crimes. She is his guarantee of your cooperation should you surface with inconvenient truths." The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Through the window, they could see Ragnar Bloodeye and his men riding up the village path, their arrival exactly as promised. But now, instead of facing simple accusations of theft and murder, they confronted a web of political conspiracy that threatened not just Thyra's life, but the freedom of the entire region. "We have perhaps minutes before they reach this house," Eirik said urgently. "What would you have us do?" Gunnar struggled to his feet, his old bones protesting the movement. "The scrying glass must be used at dawn when the light strikes the runestone at the proper angle. Tomorrow's sunrise will be our only opportunity. After that, Magnus's forces will likely occupy the village permanently. But if we attempt to uncover the treasure, we'll be confirming Magnus's claims about its existence," Thyra objected. "We could be delivering the very weapon he needs to become unstoppable." "Not if we're clever about it," Gunnar replied. "The old magics that protected the hoard included safeguards against unworthy claimants. If Magnus attempts to claim the treasure without proper bloodline and legitimate authority, the consequences could be severe." A heavy knock sounded at the door, followed by Ragnar's harsh voice. "Woodcutter, bring out the woman. Our patience is at an end." Eirik looked between Thyra and Gunnar, his mind racing through impossible choices. Surrender Thyra now and lose any chance of exposing Magnus's crimes. Resist and likely die fighting overwhelming odds, or attempt some desperate gamble based on ancient magics and family bloodlines that might be nothing more than superstition. "There's another option," Thyra said quietly, her voice carrying the resolve of someone who had made a difficult decision. "I go with them willingly, but not as their captive. I go as Thyra Eirik's daughter, rightful heir to the Sea King's legacy, to challenge Magnus publicly for his crimes." "That's suicide," Eirik protested. "He'll simply execute you and claim you confessed to your crimes before dying. Not if I have witnesses who can testify to my true identity. Not if I make my challenge before the assembled jarls of the region, in a setting where Magnus cannot simply murder his way to victory." Thyra's eyes held a determined gleam. "Gunnar, you said that dawn tomorrow would reveal the runestone's secrets. What if we use tonight to gather evidence of my bloodline? What if we present Magnus with proof he cannot simply dismiss or destroy?" The old scholar's eyes widened with understanding. "The scrying glass works not just at dawn, my lady. Any strong light reflected at the proper angle will reveal the hidden runes. And there are other tests. Blood calls to blood when it touches certain ancient artifacts." Another thunderous knock shook the door, and Ragnar's voice carried clear threat. "Open now, or we'll break down your door and take what we came for." "One moment," Eirik called back, then turned to his companions with desperate urgency. "Whatever we're going to do, we must decide now." Thyra stood, straightening her shoulders, in a gesture that proclaimed her noble heritage more clearly than any words could. "Tell them I'll come willingly, but that I demand safe passage to present my case before neutral witnesses. Ancient law grants that right to any accused of capital crimes, and if he refuses, then we discover what manner of man Ragnar Bloodeye truly is, an honorable warrior bound by ancient customs, or merely another of Magnus's murderous tools." Thyra touched the silver arm ring at her throat. Either way, the time for hiding is past. Tonight we uncover the truth of who I am and what forces move against us. Tomorrow we face the consequences of that knowledge. As Eirik moved toward the door to confront the armed men waiting outside, he realized that the quiet life he had built around his grief was truly ending. In its place rose something far more uncertain but infinitely more meaningful, the chance to stand beside a remarkable woman as she faced down forces that threatened everything good and peaceful. In their world, the confrontation at Eirik's door unfolded, with the careful tension of wolves circling before a hunt. Ragnar Blood-Eye sat his black stallion with predatory patience as his men positioned themselves in a loose semicircle around the modest timber house. Their weapons remained sheathed, but hands rested casually on sword hilts and spear shafts in the universal language of barely restrained violence. "I am told you wish to come willingly," Ragnar said as Thyra emerged from the house, her bearing straight and proud despite the circumstances. "A wise decision. It will make the journey more comfortable for all concerned. I come as Thyra Eirik's daughter of Jarl Eirik the Bold of Raven's Hollow. To answer charges that I know to be false," she replied, her voice carrying across the morning air with unmistakable authority. "And I demand the right of formal trial before neutral witnesses, as ancient law provides." A ripple of surprise passed through Ragnar's men at this declaration. They had expected to collect a cowering runaway thrall, not a noble woman making legal demands with the confidence of someone accustomed to having such demands met. Ragnar's scarred face showed no emotion, but Eirik caught the slight tightening around his eyes that spoke of a man recalculating his approach. Bold words from one accused of theft and murder. "Do you have proof of this claimed noble birth?" In response, Thyra held up the silver arm ring, its amber pieces catching the morning light like captured fire. "I bear the mark of my lineage, and my blood will prove my heritage if properly tested. But I will not be dragged away like a common criminal without proper procedures being observed. And what of your protector here?" Ragnar's cold gaze shifted to Eirik. "Will he also make demands about ancient laws and noble procedures?" Eirik stepped forward, very aware that the next words from his mouth might determine whether he lived to see another sunset. "I stand by my pledge to ensure this woman receives fair treatment. If she goes with you, I go as well to serve as witness to whatever proceedings follow." "An interesting proposition," Ragnar mused, "though perhaps unnecessary. Jarl Magnus is not unreasonable. If the woman can indeed prove her claimed identity, accommodations might be made." But Gunnar Ironbeard chose that moment to emerge from the house, leaning heavily on his walking staff, but carrying himself with the dignity of a scholar who had served at noble courts. His appearance clearly surprised Ragnar, whose eyes narrowed as he recognized something significant about the old man. "Gunnar the Wise," Ragnar said slowly. "I was told you had perished in the flames at Raven's Hollow. Death is patient, Ragnar Blood-Eye. He can wait a little longer for this old scholar." Gunnar's voice carried the subtle authority of someone accustomed to being heard with respect. "I trust you remember the obligations of hospitality and lawful procedure, even in service to your current master?" The challenge was delicately placed but unmistakable. Ragnar's reputation had been built not just on martial prowess, but on a warrior's honor that distinguished him from common brigands. To ignore ancient customs in the presence of witnesses would stain that reputation permanently. "What do you propose, old teacher?" "Grant us until sunset to gather the proof you require. If Thyra can demonstrate her true identity beyond question, then surely Jarl Magnus would prefer to negotiate with a legitimate heir rather than execute someone whose death might later bring unwelcome consequences." Ragnar considered this request while his horse stamped impatiently in the morning cold. Around them, more villagers had emerged from their houses, drawn by the tense conversation playing out before Eirik's door. Word was spreading quickly through Skarnheim that momentous events were unfolding on their quiet hillside. "Very well," Ragnar said finally. "You have until sunset to produce this alleged proof. But understand, no matter what evidence you present, the woman comes with me when the sun touches the horizon. The only question is whether she travels as prisoner or as noble guest awaiting trial. As Ragnar and his men withdrew to make camp beyond the village boundaries, Eirik felt both relief and mounting pressure. They had gained precious hours, but those hours must produce results that could save not just Thyra's life, but potentially the freedom of everyone in the coastal region. The runestone, Gunnar said without preamble as they returned to the privacy of Eirik's house. We must examine it now, while we have daylight and opportunity. But you said the scrying glass required dawnlight reflected from the fjord, Eirik protested. Dawnlight is optimal, but any strong illumination at the proper angle will reveal some of the hidden runes. And there are other tests. Gunnar reached into his pack and withdrew a small silver knife with a blade that seemed to shimmer with its own light. This is Truth Seeker, forged by the same smiths who created the arm rings. When wielded by one of legitimate bloodline, it will show visions of the past associated with ancient artifacts. Thyra accepted the knife with reverent hands, feeling its perfect balance and noting the intricate patterns worked into the silver blade. My great-grandmother's stories mentioned such a weapon, but I thought them merely tales told to entertain children. The old magic is real, my lady, though it requires proper blood and proper intention to awaken. If you are truly Astrid the Wise's descendant, Truthseeker will respond to your touch. They made their way through the village toward the central square where the mysterious runestone stood like a silent guardian over Skarnheim's daily life. The stone pillar rose twice a man's height from a circular base, its grey surface worn smooth by countless seasons of wind and weather. To casual observation it appeared completely blank, but as they drew closer, Eirik began to notice subtle variations in the stone's texture that might indeed conceal hidden markings. A crowd had gathered to watch their approach, word having spread that the mysterious woman was attempting to prove her noble heritage through ancient tests. Thorvald the law speaker stood among the observers, his weathered face grave with the understanding that whatever happened next would have consequences far beyond their small community. Gunnar, Thorvald said as they reached the runestone, I trust you understand the position you place us in. If this woman's claims prove false, then we will have learned an important truth, Gunnar replied calmly. But if her claims prove genuine, then Skarnheim will have the honor of hosting the rightful challenger to Magnus the Red's growing tyranny. Thyra approached the runestone with careful reverence. The silver knife held loosely in her right hand, while her left fingers traced the stone's seemingly blank surface. As her skin made contact with the ancient granite, something remarkable happened. Faint lines began to appear in the stone, as if written in ink that only became visible under specific conditions. There, Gunnar breathed, his voice tight with excitement. The bloodline recognition. Only those carrying the old royal heritage can awaken the stone's hidden knowledge. But it was when Thyra pressed the flat of Truthseeker's blade against a particular section of runestone that the real revelation occurred. The silver knife began to glow with soft blue light, and suddenly the air around them shimmered like heat waves rising from summer stones. Visions flashed through the watching crowd's minds, images of the stone being raised by robed figures under a full moon, of ceremonial processions carrying great chests of treasure toward a deep excavation, of solemn oaths being sworn by men and women wearing arm rings identical to the one Thyra wore. The binding ceremony, Gunnar whispered in awe. We're seeing the actual moment when the Sea King's hoard was consecrated and hidden. The visions continued, showing the careful placement of the treasure in a stone-lined chamber far beneath the runestone, protected by more than mere earth and rock. Ancient words were spoken, oaths that bound the wealth to bloodline and legitimate authority, curses laid against any who would claim it through treachery or false pretense. But the most startling vision came last, a clear image of Astrid the Wise herself, Thyra's great-grandmother, standing beside this very stone as she spoke the final words that would protect the hoard until a worthy heir could claim it. The resemblance between ancestor and descendant was unmistakable, visible to every witness present. As the visions faded and truth-seekers' glow dimmed, a profound silence fell over the assembled crowd. What they had witnessed went beyond mere proof of identity. They had seen the actual historical moment that connected their village to the great powers of the past. "The chamber lies directly beneath us," Gunnar said quietly, studying the runes that remained faintly visible on the stone's surface. "But the entrance is sealed by more than stone. It requires the willing blood of a legitimate heir, freely given in service to justice rather than personal gain." Thyra looked around at the faces surrounding her, villagers who had shown her nothing but kindness, led by a man who had risked his own life to protect her. "If I open this chamber and claim the treasure within, I place all of you in terrible danger. Magnus will come with armies to take what he believes belongs to him, and if you don't claim it," Eirik said quietly, "he will eventually find another way to break the seals and take it anyway. At least this way, the treasure serves justice rather than tyranny." The sun was already past its zenith, shadows growing longer as afternoon advanced toward the sunset deadline Ragnar had imposed. Whatever they were going to do had to be done quickly, before the opportunity passed forever. Thyra raised Truthseeker toward the sky, its blade catching the light like a beacon calling across the centuries. "Then let us see what my ancestors left for their heirs in this distant time of need." The moment Thyra's blood touched the runestone's hidden lock, the earth beneath Skarnheim village began to tremble with the deep resonance of ancient mechanisms awakening after centuries of slumber. The stone pillar itself seemed to pulse with inner light as hidden gears turned and counterweights shifted in chambers far below the surface. "Stand back," Gunnar called as cracks appeared in the packed earth around the runestone's base, spreading outward in perfect geometric patterns that spoke of deliberate design rather than random fracture. "The seal is breaking as it was meant to, slowly, safely, but irreversibly." The gathered villagers pressed closer despite the obvious danger, drawn by the unprecedented sight of their familiar square transforming before their eyes. Children who had played around the blank runestone for years now saw it revealed as something far more significant, a gateway to their own forgotten history. With grinding sounds that echoed across the fjord, sections of earth began to sink inward, revealing stone steps that descended into darkness beneath the village center. The engineering was masterful, designed to create an entrance while preserving the structural integrity of the buildings surrounding the square. But as the hidden chamber slowly opened, a new sound reached their ears from beyond the village boundaries, the thunder of many horses approaching at speed. Ragnar Bloodeye had not waited for sunset after all, and the riders accompanying him now numbered far more than the dozen he had brought initially. "Magnus himself comes," Gunnar said grimly, recognizing banners visible through the trees. "Word must have reached him about our activities here." Eirik counted at least 30 mounted warriors emerging from the forest, their mail glinting in the afternoon sun and their weapons held ready for immediate action. At their head rode a figure whose very presence seemed to darken the day, Jarl Magnus the Red, called so not for the color of his hair, but for the blood that marked his path to power. Magnus was a large man, broad-shouldered and thick through the chest, with iron-grey beard and eyes like winter ice. He rode with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to taking whatever he desired through force of arms. Behind him came not just warriors, but also several figures in dark robes who could only be practitioners of the shadowy arts that some men used to supplement steel and strategy. Thyra Eiriksdottir. Magnus's voice carried across the village like a battle horn. "I see you have chosen to reveal yourself at last. How convenient. It saves me the trouble of hunting through these hovels to find you." Thyra stood beside the partially open chamber, Truthseeker still glowing softly in her hand, her face pale but resolute. "I am here to face your accusations, Magnus the Red, but I face them as the rightful heir to powers you have tried to steal through murder and treachery." Bold words from a dead woman, Magnus replied, dismounting and striding toward the runestone, with his hand resting casually on his sword hilt. Though I admit your timing is excellent, opening the chamber saves me considerable effort in claiming what belongs to me by right of conquest. You have no right here. Gunnar stepped forward, his scholar's voice carrying surprising authority. This treasure was bound by ancient oaths that no force of arms can break. Only legitimate bloodline and just cause can claim it safely. Magnus laughed, a harsh sound devoid of any warmth. Old man, your books and legends hold no power over honest steel. Watch and learn how the modern world treats ancient foolishness. But as Magnus approached the now visible stone steps leading down to the chamber, something extraordinary happened. The robed figures behind him suddenly cried out in alarm, their voices carrying words in the old tongue that spoke of warnings and supernatural danger. "My lord," one of them called urgently, "the binding spells still hold. The treasure is protected by more than mere stone and earth. There are guardian spirits awakened by the opening of the chamber." As if summoned by his words, the air around the runestone began to shimmer and take shape. Translucent figures emerged from the stone itself, warriors in ancient armor, their faces bearing the noble features of the Sea King's bloodline. They carried spectral weapons that gleamed with their own inner light, and their eyes fixed on Magnus with unmistakable hostility. "The ancestors guard their legacy still," Thyra whispered in amazement, watching as her family's ancient protectors positioned themselves between Magnus and the treasure chamber. But Magnus was not a man easily intimidated, even by supernatural guardians. "Clever illusions," he snarled, drawing his sword in a fluid motion that spoke of countless battles. "But I have dealt with hedge wizards and their tricks before." He strode forward toward the spectral guards, his blade raised and ready. But when his steel passed through the ghostly warriors, instead of dispersing them, it seemed to energize their forms, making them more solid and threatening with each moment. The lead spirit warrior raised his ancient sword and spoke in a voice like wind through empty halls. "Magnus Bloodtaker, you who would steal what was freely given in trust, face the judgment of those you have wronged." Suddenly, the air filled with more than guardian spirits. The ghosts of Eirik the Bold and his slain sons materialized around Magnus, their wounds visible, but their purpose unmistakable. They had come to bear witness against their murderer, called forth by the same ancient powers that protected the treasure. The confrontation between Magnus and the assembled spirits of his victims transformed the peaceful village square into a supernatural battlefield that defied all normal understanding. The air itself seemed to thicken with power as ancient oaths and blood debts manifested in forms that could no longer be ignored or dismissed. Magnus's warriors, hardened men who had faced steel and flame without flinching, now backed away from their leader as the ghostly figures surrounded him. These were not mere illusions, but the actual spirits of the dead, called forth by the violation of sacred laws and empowered by the treasure chamber's awakening. "You cannot escape judgment forever," Eirik the Bold spirit intoned, his voice carrying the authority he had wielded in life. "Your crimes have awakened powers older than your ambition." But Magnus, despite facing forces beyond mortal comprehension, refused to yield. Instead, he gestured sharply to the robed figures among his retinue, dark sorcerers whose arts dealt in binding and banishment of supernatural entities. "Dispel these phantoms," Magnus commanded. "I will not be thwarted by parlor tricks and hedge magic." The sorcerers began chanting in languages that predated the coming of civilization to these lands, their words designed to send the dead back to their rest. But as their power gathered and struck against the guardian spirits, something unexpected occurred. The ancient protections around the treasure chamber drew strength from the attack, growing more solid and threatening rather than weaker. "The binding cannot be broken by force," Gunnar called out, understanding dawning in his scholarly mind. The treasure was protected specifically against those who would claim it through violence and treachery. Every hostile act only strengthens the guardians. Thyra seized upon this revelation, raising Truthseeker high so its blade caught the afternoon light. Magnus the Red, I challenge you before these witnesses and the spirits of your victims. Face me in single combat for the right to rule these lands. Winner takes all. Loser faces the judgment of those they have wronged. The challenge rang across the square with the force of ancient law behind it. Such formal combat challenges could not be refused without losing all honor and legitimacy, and Magnus knew it. But more than honor was at stake. The supernatural forces swirling around them seemed to pause, waiting to see how this mortal confrontation would resolve. You would face me in combat, girl. Magnus laughed, though the sound carried less confidence than before. I have killed seasoned warriors by the dozen. What chance do you think a Jarl's daughter has against my blade? More chance than you might expect, Thyra replied. And as she spoke, something remarkable happened to Truthseeker in her hands. The ancient blade began to resonate with the same power that animated the guardian spirits, its silver length taking on the ethereal glow of weapons meant for more than mortal combat. Eirik started forward, every instinct screaming at him to intervene, to protect this woman who had become so important to him. But Gunnar's weathered hand caught his arm with surprising strength. This is her birthright and her burden, the old scholar said quietly. The blade will guide her, and the spirits of her ancestors will lend her strength. But the choice to fight must be hers alone. Around them, the villagers watched in stunned silence as events far beyond their experience unfolded before their eyes. Thorvald the law speaker stepped forward to formally witness the combat, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority as he proclaimed the ancient rules that would govern this trial by battle. Magnus drew his own weapon, a massive sword that had tasted the blood of countless enemies, its blade dark with the stains of old victories. But as he advanced toward Thyra, the guardian spirits formed a circle around them, ensuring that this combat would proceed according to the oldest laws, with no interference from either side. When you fall, Magnus snarled, raising his sword in a two-handed grip, I will take great pleasure in finishing what I started at Raven's Hollow. Your sister awaits you in whatever realm the dead inhabit. But at the mention of Freydis, Thyra's expression transformed. The last traces of uncertainty vanished, replaced by a cold fury that spoke of royal blood awakened to its full power. Truthseeker sang in her hands as she assumed a fighting stance that seemed to flow from ancestral memory rather than training. My sister lives, she said with absolute certainty, and she will witness your defeat when I return to free her from your dungeons. The two combatants circled each other warily, Magnus seeking an opening to use his superior strength and reach, while Thyra relied on speed and the supernatural guidance flowing through her ancestral blade. Around them, the spirits watched in profound silence, their translucent forms radiating approval for their descendants' courage. When Magnus finally struck, his blow came with the force of a falling tree and the speed of a striking serpent. But Truthseeker rose to meet it with perfect timing, the clash of steel on silver ringing across the fjord like a bell tolling the end of an age. The battle for Skarnheim's future had begun. The duel between Thyra and Magnus lasted longer than anyone expected, each combatant displaying skills that transcended normal mortal abilities. Magnus fought with the brutal efficiency of a lifetime warrior, his heavy blade seeking to overwhelm through sheer force. But Thyra moved with a grace that seemed almost supernatural, Truthseeker flowing in her hands like liquid silver as it turned aside blow after devastating blow. The watching spirits lent their strength to their descendant, and gradually the tide of battle began to shift. Where Magnus grew tired from his aggressive assault, Thyra seemed to draw energy from the very stones of Skarnheim itself. Her movements became more confident, more precise, until it was she who pressed the attack, while the larger man found himself forced into desperate defense. The end came suddenly. As Magnus raised his sword for what he intended as a killing stroke, Thyra stepped inside his guard with lightning quickness. Truthseeker found the gap in his mail, sliding between ribs to pierce his heart with surgical precision. Magnus the Red, scourge of the coastal lands, fell to his knees in the village square where he had expected to claim ultimate victory. The judgment is complete, Eirik the Bold Spirit proclaimed as Magnus breathed his last. Justice has been served, and the ancient oaths are fulfilled. With their leader dead, Magnus's surviving warriors found themselves facing a terrible choice: flee immediately or face the wrath of powers beyond their understanding. Most chose flight, abandoning their fallen Jarl to disappear into the forest like smoke before wind. Only Ragnar Bloodeye remained, his scarred face thoughtful as he studied the transformed situation. "I serve no dead man," he said finally, dismounting and laying his sword at Thyra's feet in formal submission. "If you are indeed the rightful heir to these lands, then my oath transfers to you, my lady." Thyra accepted his surrender with the dignity of someone born to rule. But her first concern was not for conquest or vengeance. "Ragnar, you know where my sister is held. Will you guide me to her rescue?" "Gladly, my lady. The girl lives," though Magnus intended less pleasant fates for her once his business here was concluded, as the supernatural guardians faded back into the stone from which they had emerged. Their duty complete, the villagers of Skarnheim found themselves standing at the center of a transformed world. The treasure chamber, now fully opened, revealed wealth beyond imagination. Not just gold and silver, but ancient weapons, ceremonial regalia, and most importantly, legal documents that proved Thyra's rightful claim to vast territories throughout the coastal region. But when Gunnar suggested they begin cataloging the treasure, Thyra shook her head with a wisdom that would have made her ancestors proud. This wealth was meant to serve justice, not personal ambition, she said, looking around at the villagers who had shown her such kindness. Skarnheim will receive a portion sufficient to ensure prosperity for generations. The remainder will be used to restore peace to lands torn by Magnus's wars and to compensate those who suffered under his rule. Over the following days, as word spread of Magnus's defeat and Thyra's legitimate claim to leadership, delegations arrived from settlements throughout the region. Some came offering alliance, others seeking justice for old grievances. Still others simply curious to see the woman who had defeated a tyrant. Through ancient law and personal courage, Eirik found himself caught between profound admiration for Thyra's nobility and growing awareness of the distance that now separated their stations in life. She was revealed as a true queen in all but formal title, while he remained a simple woodcutter whose greatest ambition had been peaceful solitude. But when he attempted to withdraw, to return to his quiet hillside house and leave great affairs to those born to handle them, Thyra would have none of it. "You saved my life when I lay helpless at your gate," she said during one of their evening conversations by his hearth. "You risked everything to protect a stranger, asked nothing in return, and stood by me when easier choices presented themselves. If those are not the qualities of a true leader, then I know nothing of leadership. I am not. You are exactly what this land needs as it heals from years of violence and fear. A man who thinks of others before himself, who acts from conscience rather than ambition." Thyra's hand found his across the simple wooden table. "I'm offering you a place at my side, not as subject or servant, but as partner in rebuilding what was lost." The proposal stunned Eirik into silence. In his wildest dreams, he had never imagined such a possibility. Yet as he looked at this remarkable woman, queen and warrior, gentle healer of his long loneliness, he realized that love had grown between them as naturally as spring flowers after winter's end. "The people will say, a woodcutter is not worthy of a queen," he said. "Quietly, the people will say what people always say. But we will judge ourselves by the good we accomplished together, not by the opinions of others." 3 months later, as spring returned to the fjord and ice broke up in great singing sheets that drifted toward the sea, Eirik and Thyra were wed in a ceremony that combined ancient traditions with new hopes. Freydis, safely rescued from Magnus's stronghold, served as witness alongside Gunnar, Eonbeard, and the entire population of Skarnheim. The village that had once been a quiet haven for Simple Folk found itself the unofficial capital of a growing alliance of coastal settlements united under Thyra's wise rule. But its essential character remained unchanged, a place where kindness mattered more than status, where strangers found welcome, and where love could flourish between the most unlikely of hearts. Years later, when traveling storytellers spoke of the queen who had emerged from winter's grip to restore justice to troubled lands, they always mentioned the woodcutter who had become her consort and closest advisor. But they spoke most often of that first meeting, how the greatest love stories truly do begin with the smallest acts of kindness, and how mercy shown to a stranger can reshape the very foundations of the world.